our core product is actually a community or a network of social media and community managers. And we run weekly programming. It's an annual subscription fee. It's fairly low cost. It's $1,000 a year. And we did that for a couple of reasons. One, we wanted a relatively low entry point, but high enough that we got people that were really serious about doing this and were involved in initiatives that really had some impact versus the intern who's running the Twitter account. Because most of our members are actually a little more senior. They're about 40% managers, 40% directors, a few VPs, and individual contributors thrown in, but we're really taking a business orientation to what community management is. We're not dealing with the moderators who are just making sure people aren't swearing on their forums. That's not really where our sweet spot is. So that's our core product. We do advisory services. We recently aggregated and documented all the best practices that we've learned over the past year and published a 70-page report. And if you want to see that, you can download it for free on our website. We got sponsorship for that. But everything that we do is oriented around this community maturity model that we built, which is basically our management framework or tool on what we think is necessary to become a social business. So there's 8 competencies in it, and you can't really see them very well. 7 of those competencies are things that already exist in an organization, things like strategy and leadership, culture, and community management is the only one competency that is layered in there as something new versus something that needs to be adapted. And then there's stages of maturity as you go through this process. And again, this is my operations background speaking, saying, you know, if you really want to be a networked business, which very few are today, you can't do that without exploring community at a very tactical level first and understanding the dynamics of that. So that's what we do. I can continue talking about community management and what that means for businesses, or I can talk a little bit about how we've set up the business, because I think that's something innovative and interesting in that we're trying to be a networked business versus a hierarchical business. And I think the value chain of the business in terms of where revenue and investment comes in and where value comes out is a little different. So I'll open it up and say, what are you interested in hearing about from me?
Community.
I'm very interested in community management.
Okay.
Where you see that going?
Okay.
You know, your point about hierarchical versus, you know, it's ancient. It goes back to the ancient Greeks. Forum versus tactical, hierarchical, political organization, and two were opposed to one another. And the forum is really interesting, but finding that forum, finding that community, you know, I think you're a community of community managers. But if you were looking for a community of some other group, how would you go about that process of defining the membership that should attract the membership?
Okay. Yeah.
A few questions. If you could address, would be great. First of all, a lot of companies claim they have communities, but they really don't. So maybe you could address that. The second is, and I think you started to get into it a little bit, but in your word, what the difference is between a community manager and a moderator. And then the third is your definition of the difference between a community and a panel.
Okay.
Because I'm finding some
I'd
of those
say
things.
an audience.
I'm sorry?
There's an audience on the other end of that, which
Yeah.
is,
Because those are all very
Or network,
subtle
yeah.
differences, and I think it all the last, or especially the last question, kind of gets at the first one, which is, you know, a lot of companies say, oh yeah, we have communities, but then when you dig in, it's like they have panels. They don't they don't understand the difference.
Anything else?
Yeah, I'm interested in measurement. You know, how you
Okay.
set goals, how you measure them.
Okay, that's a really interesting topic too.
You know, I get the idea of there being community on my site, and I know that there's my community elsewhere too. And I'm curious what you have to say about sort of the, you know, my community isn't always my community. They're also someone else's community, and how do I sort of, I don't know, follow them around, or what
Yeah.
are the issues there?
Where are they?
Where-
Yeah. Was there, okay. Beth? Hi, David.
Hi, Rachel. I was just wondering if you might be able to touch on what CommuniSpace does and how you might interact with them, because I guess they have community managers
Yeah.
on staff, right? Their whole
They do
business is
fully
to-
outsourced community management
Right, so whether,
for market research, so they're very specific about their uses of community, but, yeah.
whether you're a competitor or whether you're a
Not
collaborator.
really, because
collaborator
we're
or-
helping community managers learn how to do it. They just do the whole thing. So if you want market research insights for your company, you go to them, and their tactical application of how they get the market research is through community. But they don't help companies do that themselves. They do it, so you're outsourcing the whole thing, and for a very specific business process. And we've actually thought about getting into the outsourced community management space a little bit as well, but we haven't gone there yet.
Those are closed communities as well.
They are closed communities, and there's, sometimes you want that and sometimes you don't, depending on what you're trying to do. I'll start with the what is a community, because I think that might help connect some of these conversations, and you'll have to remind me about some of your questions, because there was a wide variety there, but I think there is a lot of confusion. I've had a big rant for a while that social media is not community, and you really have to understand the difference, and using social media tools in a large network is great for some business outcomes and not for others, and communities are good for some business outcomes and not for others, but they're not the same thing. So for example, if I'm a consumer brand and I'm on Twitter talking to 1 million people, or on my Facebook page talking to 1 million people, that's not a community. That you can't possibly all know each other. And part of the way I think about how to identify a community is I put it on a scale between a one-on-one relationship all the way up to a network. A network of people are a group that is loosely connected by some similarity. We all live in Boston, we all are on Twitter, we're all female, whatever that characteristic is, there's a loose link between all of us. But within that large network, the percentage of relationships individuals within that network have with each other is very, very tiny. It's tiny. Like maybe 1/10 of 1% of the people within that network actually have relationships with each other. So the density of relationships is very small. As you move back to community, I think you can probably have a community in the thousands, tens of thousands, but the density of relationships between that network is much higher. And so if I'm managing the Dunkin' Donuts Facebook page, yes, I'm having conversations with people in that network, but I'm not trying to get them to know each other. I'm not gonna form deep relationships with somebody just because they like Dunkin' Donuts coffee. That's not sufficient for me to have a deep relationship. It's sufficient for a conversation. Oh yeah, I love that new flavor that they added, but it's not sufficient for a relationship. It may spark a relationship, and communities can exist within networks, but that's kind of the network.